Battlefield has went in some interesting directions in these past few years. Going from the military misfits of Bad Company 1 and 2 to the overly self-serious modern combat setting wasn't the choice I would have gone with, but that's only part of what I feel has gone amiss in the series since Battlefield 3. I rarely like to take the rose-tinted glasses stance and declare Bad Company 2 the greatest Battlefield has ever been, but I've went back there many a time to find the argument still holds true in my opinion. Why that's the case is maybe for another video, but for now let's talk about Battlefield 1. The single player has never been a big draw for Battlefield, and this time it seems DICE are fully aware. Instead of a singular plot, the game divides its roughly 5-hour campaign into separate short stories that take place in different theatres of the First World War. This seems to be an evolution of Star Wars Battlefront's attempt at prettying up the tutorials to act as standalone missions, and in this case it works well. Each story subtly teaches you the ins and outs of new vehicles, equipment and weaponry while treating you to these dressed up scenarios in the multiplayer maps. The scale of the maps allow for an almost Far Cry style of sandbox and choice of approach sometimes, and that's a great change from the heavily directed experiences of previous Battlefield campaigns. However, it does seem to stumble with extremely weak AI. Enemy soldier animations don't match up in stealth sequences, giving them such a limited field of view that it just breaks the immersion more than a handful of times. In gunfights they'll try to flank you without finding cover themselves, and this lack of polish doesn't help sell the very human elements the war stories go for when your lone character guns down hundreds of idiotic German soldiers without any kind of hassle. Despite these problems, the campaign does hold its own, but won't satisfy anyone shying away from the multiplayer. The set-piece thrills and spills of the campaign transfer well to its online counterpart. Due to the modes like Conquest pushing players to the far corners of each map, every area becomes their own stage for wild swings in assault and defence. Mountainous areas of Italian countryside provide snaking paths for tanks to flank dug-in defences. The treacherous cliff faces of the Sinai Desert give snipers the ability to rain hell on the opposing forces in the cramped areas below. Each map is dense with new ways to assault or defend areas pertinent to your objective, and that emphasises the grand scale of combat the series is lauded for quite well. My biggest issue with Battlefield 3 and 4's multiplayer exists in the class structure. I've always felt consolidating classes like Medic and Assault allowed for too much freedom for players to strike out on their own, and that drifted the squad-focused teamwork aspect of Battlefield farther into the background. This time it's a different story altogether as classes fall back to basics in weaponry and utility, and for the absolute better. Assault and Medic classes are now their own subsets of weaponry and utility, with the former being more anti-vehicle oriented than before. Support classes are regulated to supplying ammo and laying down barrages of heavy machine gun fire or mortar shells to help smoke out entrenched enemies. The Scout class is the same as ever for long-range sniping, however now with light anti-tank capabilities. A medic or support player can take on tanks or any kind of vehicles by themselves, so of course they'll be gravitated to assault and recon due to their nature of utility. This shift back to what I see as the gold standard of class balance makes players more inclined to stick together. These restrictions are smart callbacks to what made Battlefield a teamwork-focused shooter in the first place. The returning game modes of Rush and Conquest bring a new hybrid in the form of operations. It takes Conquest's point capture objective with Rush's offensive-defensive team structure. Attackers run off of tickets that allow multiple assaults on dug-in defenders who must hold the line for as long as possible. Storming over trenches to the whistle of commanding officers is an exhilarating feeling as an attacker and dread-inducing to see as a defender. It's a neat idea that builds off the great parts of Rush and Conquest while providing another stage for the large-scale conflicts Battlefield's known for. For smaller scale fights, new game mode Capture the Pigeon will satiate those looking for less scale and more intense close quarters combat. An interesting take on the King of the Hill style of rule set, a pigeon cage is placed on the map. Both teams must rush and hold the cage to wait out a timer that lets them release intel, scoring the holding team a point. There's an exciting sense of helplessness in outrunning an onslaught of enemy players hunting you down through snippets of the game's large maps. If you do manage to survive and release the pigeon, you best hope an enemy player isn't around to shoot the poor bird out of the sky, blowing your hope of a point into a pile of feathers. Battlefield 1 has been the closest thing to classic Battlefield this generation, and for all the better. It's the return of the chaotic yet symmetrical class-based shooter I myself have loved for years. The new setting is a refreshing change from the attempts at chasing the popularity of other mainstream shooters, and that alone is worth giving it a swing. Aside from a handful of performance problems and some really awful menu design, this is easily the best Battlefield has been in years. I give Battlefield 1 a 4 out of 5.